Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be talking about a book called Past: An Introduction to the Problem. And this book talks about a lot of different things, and we'll get our guests up here in a minute to talk about some of the themes of this book. One is obviously the past, but also obviously it's about communism, it's about Yugoslavia, it's about film. It thinks these things through a particular filmmaker, which I'll let our audience say a little bit more. I mean, our guests say a little bit more about that. Because we have, and I'm thrilled to have 4 guests today, I'm going to let them do introductions for themselves in just a moment. But before we do that, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, support us on Patreon if you like the work that we do. And most importantly, share this with folks. Share it with folks who you think would be interested. You can share it now so people know that we're having the conversation live right now. And you can join in the comments in the chat. Good morning to everybody in the chat, by the way. And if not, then they'll be able to see it later. You know, they'll be able to watch it afterwards and learn something from it, especially if you get something out of it, which I'm sure that you will today. So, and even though it might seem like a kind of, like we're talking about some past and some other place for a lot of us, since I know there are people listening from around the world, but a lot of our audience is in North America and Western Europe. There's a lot of relevance to the discussion that we're going to have today, to the moment that we're in, all over the world, I think. And so we'll look forward to talking about that a little bit as well. So without further ado, I'm going to bring to the stage our guests. Welcome. It's good to be with you all today to have this discussion. And let's start with just a little bit of introductions of yourselves and kind of connection to this project. And Boris, why don't you start us off, because I think you had the greatest involvement with this project, but I know everybody else has a role.
And I'm not a millennial, a bit older. Yes, my relation to the project is that actually I wrote most of the texts in the project, and I did also interview with Želimir Žilnik, and the book is about Želimir Žilnik and his film work. I did it. This is actually an extract from a longer video recording of an interview. I think it's like 18 hours we did the interview. So I extracted something what I find interesting, and combined texts. Why the past is a problem. First of all, I think that the world today generally and theory is obsessed with the past, which is in itself a problem. And I wanted to sort critically approach this obsession and to activate interest for the past. And in this case, it is not only the past in terms of temporal difference. It is also, a country and a culture which no longer exists on one side and on the other side. So it is a distant place which no longer exists. It is truly an utopian place, which is not place. So this is sort of try not simply to save something from the past, but to activate the interest for the past that could be translated into our today contemporary practice, and what is interest for us. Originally, I come from former Yugoslavia. I studied philosophy in Zagreb, which is now Croatia. I did my PhD in Berlin at Humboldt University in cultural theory, which I'm now sitting in Berlin. I'm a migrant from a former Yugoslavia. I wrote books on transition, on culture, etc. Generally, I'm also have always been sort of public public intellectual and a bit academic, scholar, etc. This is my general introduction into my connection to the book.
All right, thank you. Zoran, do you want to go next? Oh, hang on. Sorry, I gotta unmute you. Yeah.
Good. I'm Zoran Pantelic from Novi Sad, from today Serbia. 1,255 kilometers of the river Danube. Based on a position where we start to discover as an organization focused on art and technology. We started our own activities from the last millennium, and it's becoming gradually, more complexity into this field, trying to making kind of specific connections in art practice from Yugoslav arts and Yugoslav art production in the 60s and 70s, and how it's related to the present art production and in worldwide condition. So we, as an organization, could actually come up with several projects which is combined, media ontology and political practices in post-Yugoslav art, combine all these reflections and trying to find a proper voice, how to transduct all these practices and how resonate in present world. So one of the reasons then we're actually producing many different formats, conferences, exhibitions, screenings, etc. And that was actually the right moment to involve and invite Boris to join us, because we know each other from years and we collaborate in many different levels. But in that part, first we produced the book in Serbo-Croatian language in 13 years ago, and that was the starting point, let's say. And we are very glad, and we actually having him involving in his expertise. And as he mentioned, we tried to make kind of a very specific and pretty much unique process of producing the book, which was not like a usual suspect. So coming up together with us through this investigating process, we organized this long period of shooting with a camera and documenting this conversation in between Žilnik and Boris, which was starting to be kind of very important source for Boris to investigate even more deeply into it. And I'm very glad that he produced all these essays, which is reflect with another valuation of these conditions. I'm coming from art field, fine arts, and becoming kind of a pioneer of techno-utopist artists in the 90s, when we believed that we will shape a different world in the 90s. Unfortunately, now we are living completely different era and coming up with the same questions in the field of artificial intelligence. And through that part, I would say then this is just one path of relating on a very precise reflection of art practice in Yugoslavia, and how we could actually trace it, a precise role of the art in the present day. Today I'm talking with you from Novi Sad, from clearly semi-periphery of Europe. It's not anymore in a specific position of geopolitical spots in between two blocks, and I'm very glad that we could actually contribute in this part. So,
yeah, no, thank you. And I do want to say something about what you just said, is that the book is really interesting and kind of unorthodox in the way that it is put together, but I found it was really fun to read. There's a lot in it, and really, there's interviews, there's kind of essays, there's a mix of different kinds of forms of writing, and as you say, like, a lot of it does come from a much longer body of interviews. And so yeah, it's a cool book, and I really encourage people to check it out. And should say there's I think I have a link in the show description to it, but if not, folks can go to, for English, and we can talk about this a little bit more, but in English, you can go to iskrabooks.org, and there's even a free PDF, so you can check it out. And, you know, I definitely encourage people to support and buy the book, and it's available in multiple languages and multiple publications. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Olivera, why don't you go ahead next and introduce yourself, and correct me if I mispronounce your names, please.
No. This is the right way. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivera, and I joined the project as what we have called, for the most part, a translator. I was introduced to the book and to the idea of translating it by Zoran. I was introduced to Zoran by an artist friend, a mutual friend of ours. And I read the book in its original language. I also grew up in what was then Yugoslavia, in the city of Novi Sad, where Zoran is located and Kuda.org is located to this day. And when I read the book, I was kind of delighted to read it and gave it to everyone to read, whoever reads that language and is interested in what happened to a variety of historical narratives that exist about the place. And I thought it was a fascinating book in the sense that it made sense to people who read in that language. And I thought to myself, it makes a lot of sense it would make a lot of sense to people who read in English, which is a lot of the world these days. And I also came to it as a reader in both of these languages. And a lot of my education is from North American institutions, and whatever I did sort of for myself. And we can talk about that, like how one ends up with degrees in literature in a different language, especially in the language of empire. So I thought this was a great piece of conversation that would work with what Boris was mentioning earlier, a massive discussion about how historiography works, what it does for our understanding of where we are today, how we find ourselves in this place, what the history of socialism or communism, or an exception to a different kind of globalization, meant, how it can be discussed in any language. And especially in this case, it was an interesting, I thought, commentary on the work of artists who were kind of made by socialist Yugoslavia, and read from the structural possibilities, the way of making art that hadn't been seen before or since, and that something about that is useful to this day, as Boris argues, and Žilnik, I think, makes clear, for figuring out what we can say about what the possibilities for a future that isn't alienating, that isn't oppressive, that isn't destructive could be. So we'll talk more about.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that. Welcome. And of course, I want to welcome my friend Dubravka, who actually, it was a discussion between the two of us that, we decided to do a conversation on this book. I think I sent it to you and was like, hey, do you know this? And you're like, yeah, I know all the people who did this. And many of the folks who are watching, I'm sure, know Dubravka also from our study groups, which you've been a part of many times. And also, there's a 2-part discussion that is linked in the show description that Dubravka and Gal Kieran that we did, that covers some of different periods of their work around Yugoslavia in the past as well. And so for folks who are looking also for more information on Yugoslavia from our platform, that's one place that you can go to get some of that history and some of the aspects of that. But Dubravka, welcome. And I know that this is also a big interest of yours too, the Black film and everything else. And there's a book behind you that you were a part of. And so, so go ahead, introduce yourself.
So hi, Sana. It's it's an incredible honor to be in this conversation, and partly because I'm going to do everything Jared asked me to do, but I think also is because I'm like in this virtual room with some of the people who have shaped my work and my thinking so much in the past 20 years. So it's incredible to have this conversation. So in 2009, when I was a researcher at Jan van Eyck Academy, which was a post-academic post-academic institution for research in Maastricht in Netherlands, one of the places where there was a brief moment of anarchy, where there was a possibility for kind of non-alienated labor. We, as one does, we got really drunk and we discovered that amongst four of us, we actually share a really big interest into Yugoslav Black Wave films. So with these four of us were Gal Kiran, Žiga Testen, a graphic designer, and Pietro Bianchi, a film theorist. And I am actually an architect by training, but my interest is always in questions of kind of support system. So what kind of, I understand this kind of space as a support system for life. So and all the different institutions. So my interest in Black Wave film was always, and as many architects, I always wanted to be a filmmaker. So there's a little bit of that as well. So my interest in that was that I was super annoyed by the fact that these kind of films were kind of considered, and especially in that time, as dissident, as kind of somehow done clandestinely and outside. And this was also a moment, one of the kind of moments of the kind of transformation of European funding for culture, when the space to do critical work was kind of rapidly narrowing. So the previous austerity measures and stuff, and what seemed as a space to do any kind of critical, unpoliced space to do critical work. So we decided, let's do something about these films, and we could get money to do things, and we organized a 2-day conference where Boris was part of, and understanding that film is more than just a thing to speak. We brought Želimir Žilnik and another filmmaker, Karpo Godina, to come and speak, and we showed films in the cinema. We also ask graphic designers to interpret and make new posters for these films, understanding that there is also this other traditional film posters, which is not this monstrosity we live through now, in which the heads of the main actors are kind of scaled up in relation to their importance and probably paychecks. So that's kind of and then without a permit, went down around the streets and put them up, because poster is not a poster, and unless it's in the street. And we also, during these works, realized you can't just plonk this into a context without giving some preparatory work, because people don't know a lot now. I think that since then people know a little bit more about Yugoslavia, but people don't know about because we wanted to address contradiction and specificities, precisely that these films were not necessarily, they actually were produced within what society set up as ways to kind of support non-alienated culture as well. So that this was really important kind of to bring that. So we also organized some series of pre-works before, and then we were like, oh, we can ask for more money, we can make a book. And then in that book, we realized that, again, the conversations we were having with Želimir Žilnik were really most important for us. And I then realized also that he did one of the films that made such a big influence on me, that I watched accidentally as a kid on television, Brooklyn Gusinje, and that I didn't really know for years what that film was, or thing, but it kind of helped me situate some of my kind of background. Yeah, I didn't say I'm also born in Yugoslavia, in Niš, which is now Serbia. So I'm one of those few percent of Yugoslavs in Serbian census. Kind of cut the story short. When we made this book, which is kind of a Keen book, which came out, which was then done in the same period when the kind of introduction to past was done in this original Serbo-Croatian, we were in a lot of conversation with both Boris, who contributed to our book as well, and Zoran. We also had the kind of similar kind of issue. How do you introduce the more context than the texts that other people provided? So we have these zines when we have an interview with Žilnik, and kind of ABC of Yugoslavia, where we tried to kind of provide this kind of fragmentary context. So and this for me has been something I often have in my head, a conversation, what would Žilnik do in the moments in which I am? Because I think that thinking with not just that specific period, but actually thinking with the consistency of certain practices, that for me, Žilnik really is one of the exemplaries, are really ways in which I try to think with this kind of past of Yugoslavia, which seems as a future sometimes, in the sense of like, when I look at the conditions of what is the society today. Not just until recently, I was like Serbia today, but actually it's actually the world. Some of the capacities that with all these kind of internal contradictories and failures that Yugoslavia had seem like science fiction almost on one side. And then and also the moments in which the contradictions exploded and created this fragmentation. Some of the things that we have been living through, and especially the things that have been happening in the last 14 months, really scarily remind of some of these moments that have happened in the 90s in disintegration of Yugoslavia. So so for me, as much as I'm constantly trying to think, because I'm in academia and I'm always thinking, am I becoming like a fach idiot because academia needs to put you in a bracket? But I realize now I'm actually leaning onto kind of thinking with Yugoslavia and specific figures such as Žilnik, and specific support systems and modes of being in the world, precisely because they help me think through future that is different.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, that leads very well into the kind of first question that I wanted to ask you all, which is, there's obviously the title of this book, Past: An Introduction to the Problem. This is a provocation. There's a kind of extended thinking on this, early in the book, but also throughout. And I think it's just you laid out some of it there, Dubravka, and I love this idea too of you talking about that thinking about Yugoslavia in the past can feel almost like science fiction, because I think that is I have that experience as well sometimes when thinking with Yugoslavia, also when thinking with other experiments, in state socialism or whatever that are no longer with us. And so say a little bit about what is important about the Yugoslavian past. What are the complications in examining it now from this period, even within what used to be Yugoslavia, right? So that's one of the really, I think, interesting things about thinking about the past in Yugoslavia is that it no longer exists as a country, and yet for anyone who lives within that region, right, of the countries that used to make it up, it is clearly a part of their past as well. And so, talk a little bit about that and why film is an interesting vantage point to view the past, but also potential futures. And Boris, go ahead, lead us off.
Maybe I start as a main culprit because I gave the name and tried first, your question to answer myself. But at the moment when I started to write this text and book, I had the same problem as you. Why this past? Why it should be interested? People should be interested in it. And one moment is, and you mentioned the film. Why film? For me, for instance, I'm not a film critic, although I wrote as a public intellectual actually a lot on film. I am not interested in presenting a filmmaker in some sort of film history, which will be specific somewhere. This is former socialism. They were making films in that way. And there is a canon of the filmmakers, and he is very important point in this canon. And then next question is, what is important in his films, etc. And I would go, oh, he got this prize and that prize, he was recognized, etc. And Golden Bear in Berlin. This is this usual story of, let's say, film history, canonization, so that all who are interested in film get some idea. But this was not my point. For instance, if I would say Želimir Žilnik is what professionally? He's a lawyer. Well, yes, he's a lawyer. But then the next question is how a lawyer gets a chance to make a feature film with 24 and win the Golden Bear. This then becomes very problematic. How people who were not trained, got in position to do these things. And then you have to start to talk about what was the social environment, what were the real practical possibilities for people to create culture, to make not only films, but what was the cultural life? How was it supported? When he was, say, freelance filmmaker, almost all Yugoslav films were made by 90% of people who made film, actors, cutters, directors, etc., were actually freelance cultural workers. Oh yes, who paid health insurance? Did they have pension insurance? Yes, they did. They had both, which created a huge number and scene of, I'm talking about myself. I was also a freelance writer, journalist, translator, completely free, working on the market, earning my money on the market. But I had this support that at not a single moment I was thinking about my health, because I had healthcare. I was not thinking about, distant future, when I get old, I will get my pension. So this is something. And then you might ask immediately, how was it possible? This was a socialism. In socialism, there is the state, there is a cultural sphere, and people who work are supposed to work for the state. They should have, they should have been employed. But he was self-employed, as I was self-employed. This is then something else. There was a market. He got a chance to make his film, which is early works, which then got that Golden Bear in Berlin. And the question is, oh yes, we know this is socialism. State covers and takes care of everything. No, the film was financed by a bank loan. This is, and then you say, we are in the year 67 in a communist country, and a 24 years lawyer makes a film, and there is a bank investing into this film. You see, I am already touching this and trying to disrupt the general narrative on what was socialism, how it relates today to the, say, property relations in culture, wage cultural workers as wage workers? Do they have insurance, health insurance or not? This is a crucial question. They should be asked, for United States cultural workers, filmmakers. You guys, you want to make film. You want to be young and successful. You want to be, not be scared about what if my film fails? How shall I survive? Well, look, there was an alternative concept of society, and it is all about these alternatives on how to think of the past. Past is not interested because it is a pile of facts. This book is not written, and I'm not talking now with the purpose to teach someone about what is the truth of the past. People should search themselves, should find an interest in it. What I am trying to do now is to translate, also very personally, to translate this past into what is contemporary, what is, and what Dubravka said, what is ahead. How shall we live today? And this is not only me in Berlin, Zoran in Novi Sad, Olivera in New York. This is also in the United States of America. How in this particular political, historical situation, which is difficult, is it possible to think of alternatives? Beyond, say, property relations are either private property or state property. Former Yugoslavia is interesting because there was neither nor. It was something else. And I can really give you an anecdote here, because this is this historical the story, a glorified story of how democracy comes and all system is collapsing because it is already dead and belated, etc., etc. I was translating 1990 as a translator from German. I was translating the laws that were regulating Austrian the functioning of the theaters, how theater in the system function. And I was translating it because everybody says, the West knows what is the best way, the best laws. You just copy it, apply, and something will be better. What was the point? The idea was in the West, in the democracy, the capitalist, democratic Austrian country, that theater is owned by the state. So that this or that party or coalition of the party decides who will lead a theater, director, etc., etc. In former Yugoslavia, theaters were owned by people who worked in the theater. Actors, directors, plumbers, all who worked. And they themselves would decide who will be the director. They would decide about, what shall they do? And I was at that time asking myself, where is the improvement? Why is etatization improvement? And this is another contradiction. You see, the so-called democracy starts actually with etatization, not with privatization. So things get complicated, but it is all about alternatives. And the whole book is, it offers a very small window into something that was a real life. And this is how it is written. You get an idea of how a filmmaker was not simply making films, how he was living, how he articulated his political positions, how he survived his military service, what he did there. And what you get an impression that it was a real life with many, many possibilities and contradictions and conflicts, etc. But a life, not a pile of dead facts, that might be interesting for someone who is going to make a PhD in historiography, or I don't know, cultural memory on former Yugoslavia, in terms of this was a different culture. This was maybe something that could be interesting, and today, for all those who think that we need imagination, ability to imagine alternative world now, today.
Yeah, thank you. Olivera, did you want to follow up with that? And I'm
Sure.
sure both of you have other things you want to add. Go ahead, yeah.
I want to kind of reinforce what Boris was just saying, and also to use it as encouragement for everyone to read the book, because it's a fun book, because it's a kind of conversation about history that talks about the past not as a reason to get depressed now, because it presents all these actors in the historical narrative as people who were actively sort of considering what kind of society they were in. So the narrative that we get from the conversation between Boris and Želimir Žilnik says something about the appreciation or the realization that these are boomers killing capitalism, that it's an improbable story, and that the dissident that is Želimir Žilnik is not the kind of dissident that gets described in North America, especially, who is kind of aspiring, who is suffering from some kind of false consciousness. He's actually a better communist than the communists in power, and the dissidence has to do with his kind of disagreement with the official policy, which at its best was what Boris was just describing as the thing that kind of shaped our lives and shaped the kinds of to work, to education, to gender, to all sorts of things that are unimaginable from today's perspective. And that Želimir Žilnik was both shaped by the kind of socialist structure. Everybody wants to mention the cine clubs that were the kinds of community organizations made possible by the socialist state, in which people who had no access to technology, including filmmaking equipment, would, against all odds, get to make movies. And as Žilnik says, the emphasis was always on technical ability, so that once you know how to use the equipment, you can do whatever you want. And so people felt free to do whatever they want. And clearly there was no censorship of the kind that would get individual filmmakers to get confused or shy about what they were actually interested in. So it's a fun book to read, in the sense that Žilnik is not a depressed person and is not offering some kind of vision of how Yugo-nostalgic we can be. It's not a book about nostalgia. It's a book about understanding what the possibilities were, and that something's kind of alarming about how those possibilities were lost. That's something we can see.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, Dubravka, go ahead. You can jump in, and then Zoran. Yep. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry. So I think what is really important for me, and I'm a little bit of a younger generation, so, I was kind of born in 1980, so like the only thing that kind of happened of Yugoslavia for me was to become a pioneer. Mm-hmm. Which of course, so is this kind of this book, Žilnik's practice, and really thinking about this all of these different things allow for some of my generation and youngers an entry point into structural understanding of what Yugoslavia was, without this reframing that is constantly happening, that it was kind of super authoritarian and also always lagging behind in, like, you know, kind of lack of quality, like never achieving the kind of Western kind of quality, and you know, the art was worse, everything. So, and that there was no knowledge produced within that, because this was kind of the whole kind of approach. So I kind of also lucky that I kind of got the tail end of the education and everything. So so from that vantage point, you also start to understand the kind of how stronger is the common sense in framing what is kind of which parts of the world are more progressive, which are those who are less progressive, which can have capacity to understand, which don't. So I only relatively recently realized that in the US there is like a Pledge of Allegiance almost every morning or in the schools. And then I kind of, in that context, constantly thought, and you know, pioneer is seen as the kind of the big ideological indoctrination. But my pioneer oath was literally that, well, pledging oath, I'm going to be a good friend and diligent student. That's the content of the oath. No state, no flag. You're pledging friendship and diligence in kind of knowledge kind of acquisition, and then a kind of continuous. And I think that's for me something that help is kind of a situating in relation to what kind of how I like how I returned to Yugoslavia. And because all this like Žilnik is also great because there is like, he's not depressed, and he's also, there is a continuity of praxis. He even today, and he's an active filmmaker, he in the continuity kind of does the films in the way that they are praxis, that they are there to kind of change the world and to actually change the consciousness of you know what, like, and there is like, he wins when he was in his mid-20s, one of the biggest film prizes at the moment. He doesn't go and kind of makes kind of a career that, you know, big blockbuster films and stuff. He actually continues to work, which is also from the, like, what film can be, when our imagination of what we can, how life can be, how what institution can be, how what the culture can be, it has become so austere that kind of thinking with this period allows us to kind of also maybe in some ways liberate imaginations. For me, this is kind of a, like, I like this. Recently, I read the book by Sonja Vaz Borges, one of the millennials of Killing Capitalism. Guest Raga's Because the Sea Has No Place to Grab, a Memory of Hope, Migration, African Liberation, and Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Craig Wilmore have in forward had this really beautiful sentence about like Pan-Africanist tradition of seeing the past, is not as a point of arrival, but as a practice from which to build anew. And this really kind of, when I read that sentence, I realized that's in a way a little bit for me what Yugoslavia is doing, this return to this tradition. And I think that kino clubs, which were really like it was called people's technique. So people need a cook, like people need to have access to knowledge about technology. So you had photo clubs, and then in a bigger kind of urban centers, you also had kino clubs, which meant you actually had like, this is a pre-time that you couldn't, you know, access to technology was super complicated. So what does it actually mean to have a film which you can develop, and all the technology and all the self-management that Boris was mentioning? People had like people in the theater, everyone who worked without differentiation between the maintenance workers or actors, which of course was something that was contested because bourgeois professional identities always want to have their bourgeois professional identities. And we, like, you know, I did a lot of that work in my work on architects of that period. People had also legibility of understanding the system. So they had interpretive tools to situate Yugoslavia in relation to the world, to understand how the system works. And when you have a kind of interpretive tools to understand the system that structures possibility or impossibility of your everyday life, people had to vote whether they're the kind of in their places of work, whether they're gonna invest profit into expansion of the kind of workplaces or into new housing to be redistributed through right to housing as societal housing, or into contribution to the local house of culture, which was connected to their reproduction of their everyday life. People actually have a better legibility to kind of read through the opaqueness of built environments, to read through the opaqueness of governments. Our lack of our austerity of our imagination today to see beyond what we are living and struggle that we are living is, I think, also connected to our lack of interpretive tools to actually understand what structures and influences. You know, that the fact that my rent is getting higher constantly and that my trash is getting less and less frequently collected are two part of the same structural problem and not the two different. And this book can really kind of open up this in a weird way, because it's also the way that it's structured as fragments. It doesn't give a totality. It leaves a lot of space for contradiction, which means that it leaves a lot of space to think with, in which the different form of reading emerges.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Zoran, did you want to add some other comments? And then I know we're going to play a clip here in a minute, but go ahead.
Good. Yeah, I would like just to add, when we already touched the role of kino clubs, and just to mention then this specific emancipatory role in Yugoslavia in that time, which is melt together the professionals and amateurs and everyone who is actually built on this imaginary aspects. And what I would like just to add then, in these amateur clubs, you know, Žilnik also met with you know, filmmakers, and it was a specific process than they being kind of far out of the main spot of let's say kind of censorship or any kind of, you know, control. So the kino clubs was really a field of experimental field, and a lot of aspects to either technological and also through the specific subject of critical voice of society was rise in kino clubs. And when we go deeply in this black way of Yugoslav film, we could actually mention then all these major filmmakers was come up from kino clubs, and that is a very crucial moment into it. But basically, our book was focused on relying on conversation in between Boris and Žilnik, not specifically focused on a film as such, but it was an interesting form. Then through conversation with Žilnik, we discuss about film as a specific medium, as a documenting a period of time and social life, and through that. We find out then also for us what was interesting then as same as we actually produce this very specific collective process of producing the book through filming, conversation, taking all these parts and involving all people in the circle. Film is also collective product, and then that's kind of another dimension that we would like to connect and to face it. Then in this imaginary, you know, provision, we could be together into it, and especially when we come up with this book, we just realized then we didn't actually know how to expect, you know, the reflection of the book, because the very first one was produced in Serbo-Croatian, and then. You know, following the timeline, we just realized that we're having strongly feedback than people actually asking for it, and that's the period when we actually start to discuss about necessity or opportunity to translate. Through this organic ecosystem, being in contact with Boris, with Dubravka, and meeting up with Olivera, we starting to discuss, okay, let's do this. And then that's the reason that we actually come up in this book with a lot of additional part, as we call it, multimodal, edition. Then it could be, more explaining about a specific subject, which in conversation in between Boris and Buden, Boris and Žilnik could be kind of self-referent, and then it's to explaining more clearly.
Yeah, we should clarify what you're saying a little bit, because there are QR codes, right, that are within the book that take you to other, texts, other reference points, which is a really cool. I really thought that was a neat aspect of the book that we haven't touched on yet. So that, yeah, as there are things that are being discussed, rather, I mean, you do obviously have footnotes and just, links and things like that, but there are actually within the text, QR codes where you can jump to a resource. If you want to say something about that, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the whole circle of people involving in producing this book, it's the people who are having a very rich experiences, and then we actually discussing then are we going to make kind of a cortex, or how we are actually going to make something. Then it's not just another one book as a academic book, or it's repairing. So we've been completely free to produce from our own position what could be possible, new perspective of the knowledge, and we would like to provide. And just because of this, then we realized then we have to translate the book. We discussed with Olivera then what will be the proper process, and are we going to write a new book because it's having a lot of footnotes and explanations. Then through this process, actually we realized then we could actually combine and to put some other aspects of technological connections, and to be right and to connect any users to being present in devices all around. And it could be actually a stronger support to understand, not only with the written footnotes, but it's provide much more multimedia content that could help in the whole content. So I'm glad that we actually made it on this way, which is actually confirm and making stronger all these organic spots with a friend of us and collaborators for years, and then putting in this level of references and the books and films, and comes up from a pool of kind of specific titles, then provide major policy of open code and free education, which was from the very beginning very important for us.
All right, yeah, great. I know, Dubravka, why don't you? Well,
yeah, I can jump in and with this, because I think that this is also kind of like, it's really interesting to see when you see like the editions from like the kind of the Serbo-Croatian editions of the Introduction to Past, or our Surfing the Black Hour book. We tried to do the same, but just with kind of ABC zine, and we had to integrate all this and footnote. How kind of 10 years later, because of the kind of growth in the region of the specific projects, and also awareness that one has to return and activate the kind of intellectual production that happened in Yugoslavia. And then one way is not, there were also really this kind of capacity to do this with QR codes and really link to this. And I think that this is also connected to some of the other contexts from which we know each other, and we also commitment to culture which is not commodified and not caring about copyright. Or that, because from the 90s onward, in various ways, there has been incredible kind of suppression of any intellectual kind of production that has happened in the period of during the socialist Yugoslavia. So after, or the kind of Yugoslavia as a project of socialist communist project, and not kind of pre-Second World War communist Yugoslavia. And what has been accessible has been often accessible because they managed to reframe this as in the ethno-nationalist context. So there have been like since, especially since like mid 2000s, in several kind of parallel processes in Belgrade around our friends Branimir Stojanović Trša, who have set up Ignorant Schoolmaster and its committees as a project, both as a physical space, but as an intellectual project of reading groups and kind of returning to the philosophy, sociology, and that type of intellectual project. We were kind of told this space has never produced any thinking that is relevant for the world, and it's for its own and the history, which also was incorporating kind of, in order to make this book knowledge accessible, you have to digitize it, because otherwise this is in parallel group. There were like comrades in Zagreb around Slobodni Filozofski, which grew out of the occupation of the Faculty of Philosophy, that kind of really committed to intellectually rethinking and activating that kind of body of knowledge. And in parallel, in Multimedia Institute, MAMA, there has been like through the project initiated by Marcel Mars and Tomislav Medak, the kind of process called Memory of the World, which is kind of something that you can notice in the links we are sharing, kind of linking up all these initiatives, building up digital book scanners, so that we can actually physically not just photocopy and share books, but actually commit to digitization of this material and then its activation. And it's kind of understanding that no one's going to do this recovery of our own intellectual past unless we do it, and that the intellectual past can also help us think through where we are at the moment and what this space in the world can be, besides being relegated to the periphery. This is especially relevant in Croatia, where one of the kind of first acts of instituting national state was something that's Ante Lešaja called bibliocid or knjigocid, or like bibliocid in kind of English translation would be like bibliocide, like purging of the books from, especially from the library, if they had anything to do with like Yugoslav socialism, Yugoslav partisan struggle, if they were printed in Belgrade, if they were kind of using Cyrillic. All this was kind of using the kind of official the system that you can write off books from the library as like damaged stock. In like tens of thousands of books were purged. So even if you actually were interested in some of the thinking that was coming up from the people, you stumble upon this, it was really difficult to access this book. So I think that so this also comes from understanding that of kind of knowledge from scarcity, that you have to claim the knowledge for yourself. And I think this is something that then this book really beautifully does. It exists as a PDF. It's there as a physical copy. It points you to that other world, but it also invites you to share it and read it with others. Because like there is a question of socialization of knowledge, which is always, so it's not about, and which points also to, when we start to think about kino clubs and all this, you immediately start to realize these spaces existed because they didn't have to pay a market rent. The space was not commodified alienation. So how do you, and how so much of our transformation as kind of thinking beings and consciousness is also predicated on a capacity to sit together in physical space, in physical proximity and presence. And we have to think up of other concepts that are not how do you pull resources together to pay rent in order to have those spaces.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, go ahead, Boris, and then I know Olivera, you want to add something as well.
Yes, Dubravka, just to correct you, it was not a few thousand or tens of thousands of books. It's about millions, you know. It is almost 15% of the stock of books in public libraries, which means, you know, I have my PhD from Humboldt University, you know, on the other side of the street is the site where Nazis burned the books in the 30s, you know, burning the books. And we think, oh, this is this totalitarian past. But then democracy arrived to repeat burning experience of burning of books. You know, we make a book having this experience in our real life. having, just imagine a professor who is Antele Shaya, one day he just, went out for a walk and saw a huge piles of thousands of books on garbage, in the rain. And he was shocked. Then he wrote the book on it. This is the shock of the democracy, I say, And this is one thing, that book is something that is truly social and collective event. This story. Now I'm the author, and Olivera is a translator. When the book is translated from Croatian, Serbian into English, Olivera is supposed to disappear from the scene. This is how we erase translators from the position of presentation of knowledge, of literature, culture, of anything. But we could not do it because translation of the book into English was truly a collective achievement and work and labor. And Olivera is truly, how shall I say, deserves to be on the cover. But it is not only about Olivera. This is this idea of collectivity, and what is mentioned, amateurs, all these kino clubs, film clubs. When I was a kid, there was a photo club. You go somewhere where there are technologies there, but there are some people who know how to use it, who will help you how to use it. But amateurism, and just to remind you, amateurism is not something that should be forgotten when people become professionals. Professional is good, this is competency, knowledge. This is people who are supposed to know how to do things, and amateurs are sort of, losers. Also, amateur comes from amare, from love, from loving your job. And the book is about loving, about love and filmmaking, about love and society, about love, philosophy. You have this philia in the philosophy, which is again loving. Želimir Žilnik is a young lawyer, makes films. At the same time, he, as a host and moderator, hosts at that time in Novi Sad the leading philosophers of former Yugoslavia. So you have this, camera, theory, philosophy, audience, public situation, which was possible. Theory is not something closed in some academic box with professors supposed to know how to think and what people should think, and to explain the world to all those amateurs who don't think. This is a different experience, and we have tried actually, to preserve this experience, which includes, again, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a film critic. I produce theory, but this is not a contradiction. This is part of the life and the social truth of cultural production, moment of collectivity, not simply, subjects, authors, individuals, always in the front, in the limelight, and all other have to disappear. This is, so it's sort of critique of the situation in which we live, which, situation called democracy, capitalism, the prosperity future. The question is whether we have any now, but okay, for a moment we will discuss. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, Olivera, go ahead. Oh, sorry, you're muted. Yeah, unmute.
Sorry. I wanted to say that something about the shape in which the book appears has something to do with the process of translation. But as everybody else has said, it's not the process of translation that presumes that there's transparency and you just kind of transpose one thing into another language, but that part of it is in anticipation that any kind of argument or conversation about how a socialist past could actually have something for us, that kind of argument could be outlandish. All the materials that support the book that we have kind of compiled in here and organized in a certain kind of way are to kind of remind everyone and to allow entry into the book for anyone who maybe never thought about this possibility, that these ideas are not outlandish, and that these resources that we make available, number one, make for a gorgeous book. I think we should also say that the designer of the book, Dan Kršić, did a fantastic job. It's a gorgeous book. And it's a book with pictures, and it's a book with sort of technological advancements. And it's all about how sort of a translation makes the book and all the past that it carries give the opportunity for everyone to kind of see the conditions of possibility for these ideas. That we know everyone who worked in this book, that we're kind of friendly with everyone, that we know that they believe in a certain kind of existence in a society that it enables the work of this kind to appear, and that it kind of makes it possible to imagine, partly because the language of it that Boris wrote originally is kind of, and I think he says it in the book very explicitly, it's a kind of language that isn't a national language. It's a language of thinking about how to imagine the past, or what are the languages we have available to us in any national language. That all of that together makes it possible to kind of reorganize imagination and to figure out what we can say now about projects that were or can be like Yugoslavia, which in effect was a project of modernization, and it was very explicitly an anti-fascist project of modernization, and that kind of possibility gets lost. So it's kind of a little thing you can read in a language that many people ostensibly read now, and it can kind of work with your imagination. I think it's a good exercise for anyone.
Right on. So I'm going to take a quick break here and show folks about 3 minutes of one of the films. Does one of you want to set this up just a little bit, just give a little bit of context of what we're about to see, and then we can obviously talk about it more after we play it. Dubravka, maybe?
Yeah, I can do it. So what we're going to see is the clip from Black Film, a short film, kind of documentary. It's kind of a specific way in which it's kind of good insert into the one of the dominant ways in which Žilnik was making film, which is kind of a mixture between fiction and documentary. With a lot, this one is more on the documentary side, but it's in a lot is kind of intentional, with a lot of intention and kind of provocation of that. It's not just recording live. The title comes from the fact that at that moment in time, this name Black Wave that we use already became kind of institutional recognized. This name did not happen. Didn't come from those filmmakers as something that puts them together, but it was given to them from the outside to the kind of the shock of that type of film coming, and kind of as a kind of other ways of making films in relation to what was the mainstream film culture at the time in Yugoslavia. So this is a kind of a way of kind of taking the kind of critique of something that was given as something that should kind of be labeling them as bad from the stage, taking this and then making it one's own. And the film for me is incredibly important because it sets the context of the contradictions of the Yugoslav spatial politics really well, because it kind of deals with what exposes what should not have been, like in the state which set up a right to housing as the kind of one of the primary pillars on which it builds this anti-fascist new society, emancipated society. It kind of puts a spotlight about the state, their state not fulfilling the kind of, or not being able to see all the members of its society.
Right. All right, let's play it, and then we can chat more about it right afterwards. All right.
Novi Sad, petak, 29. januar 1971. godine, sada je oko 3 sata ujutru. Evo ovih 6 ljudi našli smo da nemaju gdje da spavaju noćas i u ovom dokumentarnom filmu pokušat ćemo nekako da im nađemo smeštaj.
Lošo spavam, lošo jedem, sve mi je, nemam udobnost nikakvu, a zdrava Franja, molim, nemam više sada govorim. Eto, niko mi ništa ne da, ni penzije, ništa, molit ću, nema ništa da govorim.
Ja se zovem Palin Kastelan. Rođen sam u Teberingu, a sad živim u Novom Sadu. Nije baš to tako teško život, bez stana živiti. Samo trebao bi jedan stan da gradim neko, da daju ovo takvim ljudima, znate, koji nema stan.
Ja sam Uljeti Cveta, rodom iz Mola. Došao sam u Novi Sad tražeći posla, nemam gdje da stanem, nemam stan. Milicija nas ganja, juri, vija. Spavam po stanici, po bunkerima, po vagonima. Kad nas uvaći, kojeg dobijemo, izvučemo deblji kraj. Kako koji se zna znači, taj umakne, koji ne zna, taj dobije.
Ja sam Luka Vover, rođen u Sremskim Karlovcima. Bio u Dubrovniku u bolnici 2 godine. Doputovao večeras u Novi Sad. Pa sam morao da ostanem na stanici, uvotili me vaši ljudi.
Ja sam Živanče Milorad, koji živi 2 mjeseca bez stana, spavam po podrumima, po kafanama, po bifejima i sve koji nije dobijam 10.000 dinara od grada Novog Sada pomoći, a stan košta 16.000.
Jel krupno?
Jeste.
Ja sam Želimir Žilnik, 28 godina, 72 kile, 166, 167 visok, pravnik po zanimanju, bavim se filmom, imam 1 ženu, 1 dete, stan 48 kvadrata, dvosobni, vrlo nam je dobro, prosječni prihodi 200-300 hiljada mesečno. Ovakav jedan film sam već pre 1-2 pravio, međutim ovih ljudi ima stalno.
Ajde ljudi, uđite unutra. Evo ovdje, samo tišina da se žena ne pina. Ivana, samo smo doveli za nekoliko dana ovih 6 ljudi, samo tišina da se ne probudi dete, skinite se tu. Malo dete, skinite se. Nemoj cipele, uđi.
All right. Let's see. How do I get us back? Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, who wants to start in talking about what we just saw? Go ahead, Boris. Yeah.
This is interesting because within a few minutes you see all the contradictions of the market socialism. You see class difference. He is lawyer, filmmaker, middle class. He has apartment, a family, etc. But they are out there. They are, what is this? Unemployment. What is unemployment? How there was unemployment in socialism? Well, very simple. After the beginning of the 50s, introduction of the market economy created a situation in which subjects of production, be it factories, hotels, etc., they were taking only as many workers as needed to be competitive on the market, which created a huge problem called unemployment. At the same time, there was a growth, a huge growth, even growth of productivity. Yugoslavia in the 50s has a growth of productivity on the level of Japan, which is, industrialization, modernization. But this was the other side. This was the dark side of the promise of socialism. And you see that this was at the same time, of course, clear and open provocation to all the ideology about, tomorrow, there will be better, everybody will. No, this was not true. And the film directly deals with this contradiction. It shows good contradiction and opens the discussion. The system got angry, the authorities, the party, and it was clear that there will be a conflict, and there was a conflict. There was a huge conflict. They were at the beginning of the 70s, filmmakers who were producing this sort of films, also feature films, dealing with the negative side of socialist life, criticizing the system and the reality. They were either silenced, or some of them migrated, and it looks like they were dissidents. But this is the story of Žilnik. He goes to Germany, he starts to work in Germany, and then few years later, he is kicked away from Germany, escorted by the police. This is the story about double dissident from the socialist East to the capitalist West, and back from the capitalist West to the socialist East. And it goes, so far that the German state tried to censor Želimir Žilnik when he produced something for theater in Novi Sad, via a German ambassador, tried to, impose censorship in former Yugoslavia via the Yugoslav system. So things get complicated, very, very complicated. And this is what the book is about, that these simple stories, and this is the story how today this, discourse about freedom-loving dissidents, victims of totalitarianism, and then democracy and capitalism arrives, and everything will be beautiful, which is, party system, etc. This film and our book and the whole story actually tries to create new discourse, not on the past, but on the possible alternatives today. This is what it is about. And it's not about what was the true socialism. I don't know. And this is not the topic, how to know what was the true socialism. But there are certain experiences which have value in themselves. And these experiences, as all real historical experiences, are contradictory, are ambivalent, are this is what makes them also political and what makes them alive. Precisely this moment of contingency. It could have been different. We should have done this differently. But this is the idea that another past is possible. Yes, indeed, but only if another future is possible. Then it makes sense.
Yeah, appreciate it. Who wants to jump in?
I just wanted to say a little bit about the book as a complex sort of landscape of possibilities, and how it sort of uses, in a way, Želimir Žilnik as a particular kind of figure. And Boris writes a lot about the sort of uniqueness of Žilnik's position. That there's something about the way that Žilnik responds to the conditions of possibility that the society or the social structures make possible, that his career is a career of an unusual kind in the sense that he kind of makes movies in different environments across the wars of the 1990s, outside the sort of socialist structures of the 1970s, and that he responds at a later date to the sort of nationalist frenzies as Yugoslavia is falling apart. These days he's making movies about migrants, that there's kind of an ongoing responsiveness, and that kind of engagement with art or with a technology that makes art but also makes documentation, I think is important to kind of notice, because it's what makes the discussion about art making from former Yugoslavia a particularly important and interesting way to approach what we can say now about art making as a venue for organizing political imagination, for remembering that other possibilities exist, that some kind of self-conscious about where we get ideas about what's possible has to do with the kind of art making that we have been exposed to, and the kind of historical narratives that these ideas of possibility are tied to. Dubravka, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this is something that that is really interesting, is that like Žilnik keeps reminding us that we need to kind of insist on the kind of space of culture as a site of production of political subjectivity, and which then has like and also the kind of fact that a lot of our experiences of culture are always collective. You know, we go to films together, we do things together, we talk about these things, and then he so much of, like, one can look through the kind of the progression of the films he was doing as a spotlight of kind of revealing contradictions, whether within Yugoslavia or in the relationship between Yugoslavia and other places. Like, he has, after he emigrates after he goes to as a guest worker to Germany, he has this beautiful short film called Inventur. I forgot the street name, and then which basically just everyone who lived at that moment in time in that building goes down the stairs in the kind of hallway of the building and introduces themselves, and then you really have like the whole kind of snapshot of like German, Turkish, Yugoslav, all these different people, you know, something, you know, that reminding us that, you know, that every seventh man in industrial worker in Germany at that time was non-German, and all these and it's never about that kind of a problematic gaze from the outside in which he's trying to humanize, like, you know, all his like Kennedy trilogy, which are kind of related to the kind of one of the kind of early 2000 kind of migration, the troubles of Roma population from Yugoslavia, which kind of gets stuck between continuous cycles of trying to be in Germany, being expatriated, being returned, and trying to navigate it. Those films are not about humanizing his protagonists, so that we have to kind of find sympathy and empathy for them. So it's kind of an resolutely not a liberal way of addressing this. One of my favorite films of his is 1973 Uprising in Yazak, in which is like a critique of, it's really understanding, it's a critique of the then dominant mainstream partisan films made, even realizing that these films were completely misinterpreted in memory of how what was Yugoslav partisan anti-fascist struggle in the Second World War, and that reframing that memory into this Western-like blockbuster in which two guys killed everyone really is what we then lived through, erasing understanding that how anti-fascism that was how the liberation struggle was revolutionary, not because there were two guys who kind of killed everyone, but because it was aggregation of multiple minor acts of the whole population, which in that process transformed into kind of socialist political subjects and not as passive. And so it is really in these moments in crisis in which it's so hard to figure out what are we, how are we even talking to each other, that we think that we are actually talking about or kind of doing the same struggle, in which so much of our imagination and vocabulary constantly gets captured. I think that this practice can really help us to, I don't know, at least for some moments, find hope that it's possible to be consistent and to try to kind of keep on doing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to add a few words, because I think this is important. This is the legacy, not simply of anti-fascism, but also of a revolution, because there was a revolution. We called it revolution, and it made sense to be called revolution, because in this film, but this is not the only film. You see that this is definitely socially formative, transformative praxis in which common people, in a most creative way collaborate. And this is anti-fascism is not a political position. It makes no sense if it does not transform society. In the former Yugoslavia, well, they use, which is very, very interesting, the notion of resistance, which is, in the West, it is so positively charged. If there is a fascism, you do resist. We should resist. Capitalism resist. They never called themselves resistance movement. They never called the real anti-fascist struggle resistance, because it was not about resisting. It was about changing the world. You have organized so-called anti-fascist front of women, organizing 2 million women, organizing to change the position of the women in society. This is not, resisting fascism. It is about changing of the role and the relation between men and women, which ends that 45 in the Constitution, men and women for same jobs have guaranteed wages, equal wages for the same job constitutionally. 74 in the Constitution, abortion is constitutionally guaranteed. So this is not about from academic feminist theorist within academia have been creating feminist theory. They were invited. Donna Haraway was 83, invited in former Yugoslavia as a feminist. 78, there is International Congress, Feminist Congress. But this is the part of the system. The system, despite all of contradictions and failures, also failures in the sense of liberating women, was trying to do something about it, and did something about it. So this is to understand that revolution is not some freaks, storm Winter Palace and start to kill first the enemy and then among themselves each other. No, this is something truly democratically. It's about democracy. Revolution is about democracy. But again, yes, indeed, not representative party politics, something else. But this something else might be interesting today.
And the question of liberation, because I think that's the liberation was the world. It was not, it was that there were the revolution and the liberation, and these were the horizons that were set up, both not only in the 1941 in the struggle, they were set up way before, because I think that something that I think is incredibly important, and this is something that I have been really thinking a lot in the last year, when these moments when that make you real, when you make you think that's when you start to actually really understand something that you have as information, and what does this actually mean in practice on the ground and the life lived. Yugoslav Communist Party was banned in 1921. What they were the kind of the main driver organizing liberation, struggle, and revolution from 41 onwards, when the Nazi occupation of Yugoslavia started with bombing of Belgrade. But what does it mean? This is 20 years in between, in the incredible oppression and suppression, with concentration camps, internment camps made to kind of imprison those who are engaged in communist organizing work on the ground, in the kind of really kind of rethinking the relationship between like urban and rural area, and using culture and using art. And we have like surrealist poets who went and realized, okay, it's actually the moment in the like mid-30s in which they realize, okay, it's either art or people, and they turn to people and they start to do kind of work with the people in the rural. And Yugoslavia at that time is like 30% urban, and incredibly unevenly where this part on its own territory, where is actually urban and where is dominantly rural, because Yugoslavia is also kind of incredibly unevenly developed from its kind of constitution until the kind of fragmentation and ongoing. So a number of these people went through the kind of Spanish Civil War, but these are like surrealist poets who then go and become Kočo Popović, the class traitors par excellence, who go from PhDs to Sorbonne and some of the kind of most privileged parts of the society, then into civil war, and then this partisan kind of leading part, some of the kind of partisan struggle, and then they set up Yugoslav diplomacy. And I think that this is also something that is really kind of, that this doesn't come out of nowhere. It also comes from 20 years of working illegally, in which the access to printing press, access to counter, access, what type of art you make in order to communicate with the people is incredibly important. And I've been thinking about this because both of my grandparents were like, from my father's side, were like members of the party, and but they were born in 1912 and 1913. They surely didn't join when it was kind of legal. So what does it actually mean to organize in those conditions, and then have, and still on 20 years later have a capacity to start that type of liberation, kind of revolutionary fight?
I wanted to say just a couple of things about the gender element of all this. The final chapter of the book is kind of focused on that as also a significant kind of stream of thinking in and engagement in Žilnik's filmmaking. But in terms of, and this I think should be interesting to anyone who's thinking about how the election went in the United States. The intervention of the socialist state in the ideas about gender and how work and family and ideas about what women can do and what men can do, I think it's hard to overestimate what a revolutionary intervention that was. And I think we can see it to this day, not just in sort of the legacy of people who come like me from families of illiterate peasants, but that there's something that entire question staged for the entire society that has to do with what is natural, what is social, what is changeable, what is unchangeable, what can be worked with, what cannot, and kind of against the arguments about kind of the crazy Balkan politics, ancient hatreds, nationalism, blah, 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 that kind of takes over everyone. You can totally trace the return of nationalism to the sort of retrenchment of traditionalism, gender norms, like decent people behavior, bourgeois domesticity, all of that stuff. So I think the connection between gender and socialist legacies and feminism as it appears today gives a lot to think about, and anyone who wants to be disappointed or depressed can think about how we have other ways to think about this.
Yeah, I do want to go back there in a minute, maybe to talk a little bit about, also the ethno-nationalism in the 90s and how this is a destructive process for Yugoslavia, but and how we can think about that today with the proliferation of right-wing nationalism and so on. But Zoran, was there anything that you wanted to add from either on that or on things that we've been touching on? Oh, sorry, there, I unmuted you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. He's still muted.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I can just add, and after those thoughts, related to this notion of revolution in during the Second World War, it's interesting, as a specific character of the Yugoslav revolution was actually come up with this liberation and joining. People was actually in fighting with it. It's not the regular army basically, and then taking this kind of the notion of either young and old and female and male, bringing together, it's actually completely different perspective of what being in a position of fighting for the future. And it's when we are going to make a kind of overview of relations or analysis of that period of the war, we could constantly being in a position on non-compatible position, then all these armies of comes up through the royal aspect or German army or Italian or all kind of collaboration. It's really reflect completely different points of perspectives what has come up later on in socialism. And I think then we go up and down and changing the digression relating to this. I would just want to point it out, and Boris mentioned in one moment, then what we actually come up with the idea of this book to making kind of specific document about the experiences of facing the reality of history regression and of criticism today. And it comes to us being in a position to having also Želimir as a witness and author who was together with us almost 40 years. Then we are trying to through these programs and projects, what I mentioned, then through media ontology or political practices and post-Yugoslav art, we try to reach as much as we can, and not only as we mentioned, this is not a book about the film, and it's with him we mentioned several already circles collaboration with Žilnik, mentioned exhibitions or different spots of approaching of his own work, and even today what he is doing. And then it's not just story about precisely scanning of socialistic time. It's a question what we can learn or how we could provide some failures from that period of implementation in the present world. And that could be kind of maybe kind of our own, you know, step into the present production of knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I did want to open a little space, as some of you have kind of alluded to throughout this conversation, also to use this book to think a little bit with our present as well, but also use, you know, Yugoslavian history a little bit to think with the present, because I think, you know, as you all have talked about, is like the book presents a past that has its own contradictions, that is also living, and it has real life examples of things that were very positive, as well as we see in Žilnik's film there, you know, things that people within the society were still working to say, how do we resolve this contradiction? You know, what do we do to improve this society? And then we also have, you know, unfortunately, the really horrible story, really, of how the Yugoslavian project comes to be, you know, really destroyed through war. And you know, obviously there are. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Boris.
Thank you. You mentioned also the problem of ethnical hatred, and the good starting point is precisely the experience of fascism. Because look, the European South, which means, you know, take also Portugal, but Spain explicitly, Italy, Yugoslavia, Albania, Greece, experiences fascism in the sense of civil war. Fascism is a civil war, which means that you cannot identify it with any sort of identity. Fascists are not Germans, you know, are not Italians. They are everywhere. Croats, Slovenians, Serbs, Muslims. Anybody can be fascist. And this experience of a non-identitarian position, if you take, you know, a position of emancipation, and fighting fascism, this is an important legacy, and you see it everywhere. Look, Žilnik was born 42 in the concentration camp. His name Želimir, actually translated, means a person who wants peace. He was born, his mother was executed immediately thereafter. She knew that she will gave birth to a child. She managed to give a name to the child, and she was executed. His father, who was partisan 44, was decapitated by the Serbian Chetniks. Also, he was Slovene in Serbia. In Serbia, some 15 years ago, right-wing Chetnik fascists organized some sort of performance in Niš, where there was a beast of Želimir Žilnik, father, you know, head, and they covered the head, you know, decapitating once again the enemy. He was communist, yes indeed, partisan, etc. So what we have experienced is, if I might say, the continuation of civil war, very much with democratic means, but this is also a very contradictory and ambivalent experience of fascism and democracy. So that fascism might, you know, return as a with the democratic means. And this is also a very traumatic experience, which has nothing to do with the past, and unfortunately maybe with the future. So in this case, in these films, in this history, we see a sort of social emancipatory historical experience which is alive. There is no, Želimir Žilnik and the world he depicts in his films consists never of victims. There are no victims. We never end in a courtroom, with victims, perpetrators, judges. In the history, there are no courtrooms. There are either living experiences which participate in creation of history, or an ideological claim that there is no history, which is ideological, of course, and always in the interest of the ruling classes. Mentioning classes, class position in the entire work of Želimir Žilnik, this is clear. These are the classes, the low. How do we say low classes? Low classes. In these few minutes of the film, we see the ironical moment, how middle class reacts to the homeless. We can repeat it today everywhere. Bring homeless to the family home of a middle class, and you will get the same problem. So this is why I think that this is cultural experience, artistic experience, which is at the same time social and political. And this is what it's about. This is a history that wants to stay alive. That wants to stay alive. It has something to say. And this is why it is important.
Yeah, go ahead, Dubravka. Thank you.
So,
yeah.
And I think, and I think this is so incredibly important. And also this kind of thinking through fascism and as something, because I think that there is a lot there to think through in relation to the 90s, because also 90s are not finished. We are living especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Serbia and in Kosovo and Macedonia. But I also think in Croatia and even Slovenia, which are kind of integrated more in European Union, there are in maybe some less, but more. There is an aspect in which kind of we are suspended in the 90s in the region. The suspension is also through these different ways in which kind of local neoliberal authoritarianism come and hit the ground, that they now return even more with the kind of a lot of extractivist projects in which, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Serbia, in which EU comes, like German chancellor comes and says, what do you want? You are the sacrificed territory. And all the kind of Rio Tinto frozen contracts for lithium extraction, the big projects that are being planned which were never frozen, and Rio Tinto continued to buy land, which is then kind of populated land, which also produces a lot of food, and it's one of the main watershed ways in the region, which of course don't recognize the post-1990 borders. This is ongoing, in which there is no kind of, and after the reorganization of the territory in the 90s through kind of various processes of ethnic cleansing and genocide, in which each of these parts became much more nationalist, homogeneous, ethno-homogeneous. Now there is like class stratification, in which the thin layers of the kind of this fascism, in which the thin layers of a society are continuously producing sacrificed territories and bodies within our own territories. So this is, and then in which the psychosis of not dealing with the 90s in a way, or not being able to deal with the 90s, because the only framework that is given to the country is the liberal framework, which neatly classifies people into this and that category, and often locks victims and survivors into identity that were given to them by the perpetrators and not but necessarily in relation to the life they were living, keeps that status. And for me, what has been in this year of genocide in Gaza, what has been increasingly not kind of feel like sometimes I really want to kind of stand and scream, but also crush, is that how much of the vocabulary that is coming from Israel mimics the vocabulary that is coming from Republika Srpska and Serbia. This Republika Srpska being a genocidal entity formed in Bosnia and Herzegovina when Dayton peace agreement, which is a suspension of war, basically awarded Serbian ethnic sides for the ethnic cleansing they and genocide they kind of perpetrated during the war, but especially the very beginning of the war in '92, in which there is also the kind of whole implication of the geopolitical, like Britain, especially British diplomats, of not kind of preventing this. And all that International Court Tribunal for Yugoslavia was founded before Srebrenica happened. They were already working on indictments for the events that happened in '92 in the area around Prijedor. This is not the return of our past that is just around the corner. This is making us realize that we are still living that present. Maybe we just hoped or found ways. I kind of came to and like lived in various different places outside of Serbia, and now I'm in London, and then and through all these periods, Želimir does work. Kuda.org is doing the work. Boris is doing the work. So we do kind of exist as some kind of Yugoslav subjects, which are insisting on also trying to live the different life, and not just remind or kind of nostalgically return or be the grumpy people who tells you, oh, in our times, even though like I'm talking about the times that are not mine, because I kind of unfortunately or fortunately was born after.
There's something just to follow up, and any of you can respond to this, but there's something that's said in the book that I can't remember the exact quote, but there's something about Yugoslavia as not a national project, as always a supra or intranationalist project. And maybe Boris, you could add something on that if you want to, or anybody else. But yeah,
it's actually very, very simple. Yugoslavia is an emancipatory project and not identity-based or ethnically based project. There has never been Yugoslav nation. And you have something very, very clearly, speaking of revolution, which is the sort of, partisan 43, in the midst of struggle in Bosnia. They meet representatives of different nations, and they write sort of draft of the new constitution and answer the question why they should join these different nations, four world religions, living side by side, Catholics, Muslims, Orthodox, Jews, why they should create a common state. And the answer, it is one simple sentence, that the peoples of Yugoslavia decide to live together in a common state according on the base of the common struggle against fascism. No common language, no common history, no common religion, no common way of life, but a common cause of struggle, which is emancipatory. Struggle against fascism is not, resisting so that the old world before fascism survives, because you cannot fight fascism with the old world. You have to change the world. This is the only way to fight fascism. And this was the message. And this is in these terms that Yugoslavia makes sense, utopian. Some says it's in terms of struggles ahead, of the openness of the history, and the total contingency, because now we don't know what Donald Trump will decide. And if I would add, okay, we are running out of time. Please, you guys.
We don't have a hard stop, but yeah, if we should
okay.
probably wind it down. But yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Close what I wanted. Recently, Dubravka mentioned genocide Gaza, which is very, very, very recent. And I showed my students a film by Želimir Žilnik, Lipanska gibanja, which is June Turmoil. This is documentary film of the occupation of a Belgrade University 68. And, this is about how students organized cultural life while they were occupying university, their publications, how from the city, cultural workers from the Academy of Fine Arts, from the Music Academy gave concerts. And, this is occupation of university, organized, live, everything. And I ask my students, can you do this in Germany today? They can't. If they would try, if 5 of them, they would try, there would be 50 policemen on them immediately. And I thought, look, this is what history is about. This is not, a lie and tomorrow will be better than today or yesterday. It might be other way around.
Yeah, I appreciate that point. I mean, I've thought about the fact that we're all in different places, and even there's discussion of censorship within the book, and kind of troubling that notion within the Yugoslavian context, but nonetheless recognizing that there was conflict, and that there were changes made to certain films, because of certain things and things like that within, party politics and all of that. But one of the things that strikes me today is like having this conversation on YouTube, being in the UK, in Germany, in the US, like there's different laws even governing what is okay in terms of what we can say in this context. And, that's quite an interesting set of contradictions of what we have. And there's also, this so-called liberal world order that is supposed to be in place to prevent genocide, and and has totally proved its bankruptcy in this moment, as we also see Joe Biden setting up lunch with Donald Trump to hand over the government to him, as if this would be what an anti-fascist party would do, as the Democrats like to present themselves sometimes, but of course are not. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know I've just brought in a number of other things, but all of those things are things that I was thinking about also as I'm reading this book. And I think it's a good text for people to think about those questions of, censorship, of the relationship between the so-called liberal order and fascism, and also what constitutes real resistance to it, or a revolution or emancipation or liberation from it. And anyone can jump in. Go ahead, Dubravka.
Yeah, I mean, because what you're saying reminds me, one of my favorite kind of quotes is from Kwame Ture, from 1967, when he in the conference here in London, Dialectics of Liberation, kind of in the text, like in the kind of which this speech is then published as under the title Black Power in the book. He talks about who has the power to define, and how those who are to define are in power. And I think that's kind of something whenever I insist on kind of Yugoslavia and being able, Yugoslavia was able to try to define who it, people made decisions. We are coming together because of shared anti-fascist struggle. We are defining who we are. We are kind of resisting to be subsumed into kind of Soviet project. And I think that's when this call, we are so trained to think that liberal framework is the kind of neutral framework of definition, but the International Court Tribunal exists to post factum define whether something was genocide or not, and not to prevent it. So how do we claim that the kind of ways to talk about what we are living is also part of how we can overcome and find different ways to fight against it, and not just fight back, because I think that the big real important, I think this is something that shows that I'm a really good student of Millennials of Killing Capitalism, is that so much of the work here is about precisely kind of opening up through the context of abolition of the kind of all the different emancipatory horizons we point on. And I think that for, maybe I'm overstepping by saying that for all of us here, and that Yugoslavia is also one of these horizons, not in its kind of idealized state or its kind of beauty of lived life, but in the fragments which can be recovered to think where we are now with this, and not to try to replicate this as any kind of a model that comes as a IKEA flat pack that you just have to build up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I thank you, Dubravka, for the shout out to the work that we do as well. But yeah, and I think that's the thing is Boris, maybe we could close on this, because there's this discussion. I'm actually going to pull up a quote from the book real quick. Unless you have something that you want to say real quick, you can. But I have this quote on this idea, which you talked about a little bit earlier, about how I'm trying to look for it. It's this. Here we go. I got it. Hang on. All right. All right. Let me get my bookmarks out of the way. All right. So this section, the past is not even a dimension of temporality anymore, but on the contrary, a cultural artifact. This is a book that appears to be concerned with a particular segment of the past, something that used to be called cultural history, yet it does not treat cultural history as a discrete discipline of historiography, that it takes for its subject something that had acquired the status of a cultural good in the past. For this book, cultural history is the very form in which the past appears to us today. To a degree, we are conscious of the past. To the degree that we are conscious of the past, we are conscious of it as culture. And I found that particular comment really interesting to sit with, think about also how we view film also as these kind of artifacts of the past, and think of that as a different culture. But go ahead.
Yeah. This I wrote is this is the critique of the idea, of cultural memory, the critique of very idea, because we perceive the past today not in terms, this is there for a different time, but through a cultural difference. But there is this beautiful Walter Benjamin, idea that cultural history might, piles up cultural goods and values as a burden on our shoulders, but it does not give us this culture in the hands so as to change the world. And this is my point. I have been talking about, this book is not, this is a wonderful cultural value. Come and enjoy. Maybe you will be entertained by this. You must learn something about the past. You might enjoy a cultural value. No, this is a try to follow this idea of Benjamin that a culture makes sense if you can take it to change something in concrete history in your life. And This is what is the idea of Želimir Žilnik, going around with camera. This is the idea, not producing films for the, film history to be canonized, and so that filmmakers, recognize him and celebrate his way of filmmaking. This was not his idea, but precisely in these terms of Walter Benjamin, culture makes sense if it gives us ability to change the world in which we live, of course, in emancipatory terms.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place for us to close out. Thank you so much for this discussion. Again, there's references to, in the show description, the places that you can get the book. If you're an English reader, iskrabooks.org has as we said, the free PDF. I appreciated your discussion too about how the importance of sharing this book and getting it out and having discussions. And thank you so much for this conversation. This has been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.